Hi, this is William for another episode of Wild Workers, speaking today about pesticides in and around the home. On my own property here, or on any place I've ever lived, I don't use pesticides. I think it's better to work with nature, and sometimes that can be a little bit challenging, but I think ultimately you end up with more pretty results. And I know that a driveway like this mightn't be something that everybody likes, but this house where I live, when we moved here first, there was a gravel driveway, and previously this would have been managed for weeds by spraying it, and I think that can actually look pretty awful where you have burnt bits of vegetation on a gravel drive. So what I did is I allowed the weeds to grow, and in the places where we drive our car, up the sides of it, the weeds won't grow anyway because of the tyre tracks. And as grass and weeds grew up, what I did is I just used the lawnmower to keep them trimmed, and over time I've managed to develop what looks like an old kind of a farm roadway, and it has lots of really nice flowers in it, daisies, dandelions, and there's lots of black medic growing in here, it's a type of pea. It'll produce loads of yellow flowers in time. It's again very pretty. In this area over here we had removed some trees. You can still see the stumps there with the ivy on them, and in this particular place we could have went, do what people maybe normally do and dig out the whole area with a digger, put in some plastic fibre mesh, perhaps spray the area first, introduce new soil, planting scheme and so on. Instead we just work with the ground that was there, and I've allowed any wildflowers to grow up within it. But I also planted some formal plants, like lavenders, and there's some harebells in the background which haven't come up yet. The joys of filming at home. That's our dog, our neighbour's dog, who doesn't particularly like our cat, so Ollie's getting barked at right now. And the other noise you hear in the background is a singing wren, quite happy. This wall that we've put in here, these are just stones that we had found on the property that were lying in a heap. I put them together to make a nice old stone wall, good habitat for insect life. And behind the stone wall you'll notice there's a lot of oxeye daisies, which are going to burst full of flower. They look stunning when they come out. Some red campion, which is flowering. But along a lot of the back of this wall, we were working on a project where there had been wildflower plugs put in, and then they got ripped out, and I had to, by people unfortunately, and I had to save the wildflower plugs. So I stuck them in along the back of the wall, and now they're just coming into bloom and are going to flower really well, which I'm looking forward to. Up here in the field, this used to be managed with sprays to get rid of things like docks and dandelions. We want them in our field because they're really pretty, I think, but insects also love them. And we also have some places like up here in the back where we're heading now, where there's a big nettle patch coming out into the field, and that's a really important place for butterflies, particularly when they're in caterpillar form. Over here in our little woodland that we planted, we don't use any pesticides, and a lot of the weeds we might have to pick around the property can come up here and be thrown into compost heaps. We have vegetable beds, which when we cut our lawn, removing clippings, we use those as a mulch for the veg beds. So again, we don't need to use pesticides. So the theme here that's running with what I'm talking about is when you stop using pesticides, you can introduce a new workload, but you find yourself starting to work with nature rather than against it, and you end up creating more diverse habitats, quite pretty places. So something to think about for people if you use pesticides at home. Ask yourself, why do you really use them, and what might happen if you didn't. So that's me, William, from the Wild Work Initiative, Wild Workers at Home. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone. Karen here with Wild Workers at Home. Well, after some beautiful weather this week, it looks like the rain is coming, which will actually be very welcome in the garden. But it also means an increase in a less welcome garden resident. Snails and slugs. While the snails and slugs are always around, the wet weather is going to encourage greater numbers to venture out from their hiding places. And the damage they can do is not insignificant. Young plants like these beans seem to be really tasty to them, and when they're small like this, they really can't withstand too much damage. In a single evening, slugs and snails turned this baby lettuce from this into this. As you can see, it's been completely decimated. And with the ornamentals like these hostas, they're also a slug favorite. And damage to the leaves really reduces the attractiveness of a plant like this. So how to deal with snails and slugs in the garden? Well, pesticides are out. I have blackbird and song thrush, both of which will eat snails. There was even a sighting of a neighborhood hedgehog, another slug eater. And, even if poisons say they're safe for other animals, I simply don't want to take the chance that they might have unintended consequences for other garden inhabitants, whether that be the predators of the snails or slugs, or other species that don't cause damage in the garden. So what to do? Well, I think one of the most important things is to accept some slug damage. Be zen about the loss of a lettuce or the not-so-perfect hosta. But in our wet climate, slugs and snails really do need controlling. And we've tried numerous organic barriers like these sharp stones, also sheep wool, brambles, copper spray. We've also tried attractants like beer traps. And they all work a bit for a while, but with all the rain we get, none have remained effective for long. The best way that I found to control them? Heading out at night with a torch, collecting the snails and slugs, and dispatching them. And something that really helps with that is orange peels. We found that putting orange peels out with a bit of orange left in them is an absolute magnet for snails and slugs. What you want to do is head out as late as you can, at least 10 p.m. If you're a night owl, later is even better. Check your oranges and they'll be full of snails and slugs. And you can now dispatch them humanely or leave them in a place where the birds can find them. This is a little bit more labor intensive and not the most pleasant job, but we only really do this for the most vulnerable plants in the garden. For instance, once the beans are big enough, they'll be able to withstand some nibbling and they won't require constant snail surveillance. And the rest of the garden is pretty much a snail and slug paradise anyway. But I do think it's important to try and not use pesticides in the garden. This is one area where I do have a little bit of control over, and I want to try and keep it as wildlife friendly as possible. Well, I hope that is maybe of help to some of you, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. All the best from us at Wild Work.